There's a really interesting use case here that we spun up internally at our company, which was basically customers around customer support. And so what we did was we spun up an MCP server that would look up into our logs whenever a customer had a question around these. And so kind of the mental framework that we had was we cannot just, put this in the hands of customers immediately. So we made it an internal tool, and whenever a customer would ask a question around, their usage or something that is happening in a specific moment, someone in our team would ask that MCP bot the question, and they would get actually an answer. And so surprisingly, it was accurate 90% of the time, right? Very rarely did it hallucinate, despite whatever we were expecting. And I think with this speed of innovation, of not only the LMs, but also all the different protocols that are coming out, I do think that we're gonna get to a point where we can automate a lot faster than we think. And specifically with the MCP protocol, we can connect a lot of different tools and get access to data faster than ever. It still kind of breaks every now and then, but it is surprisingly good. And that kind of raises the question, what frameworks do you guys have in place today? Where to have humans, even where to have AI agents? How are you guys thinking about the human in the loop here?
Well, think about it, right? I mean, the largest model is, so we had Randy talk about differentiating between autonomous versus semi-autonomous, or more of a co-pilot type. We had Omar was pretty passionate about his use case with qualifying leads and getting leads in there, right? But at the end of the day, if you think about it, the largest models we have today are what, 20 to 30 million parameters. You're talking 3 bytes per, 3 bytes, right, per word. So, or tokens. So you're talking 10 to the power of 10 and then 14 zeros, right? Approximately. If you think about it, a 4-year-old child in the first 4 years of his life takes in about 2 megabytes per second through the optic nerves. And if you take 1600 hours, which is about 4 years, and you multiply it out, surprisingly, you get 10 to the power of 14 again. So in terms of AGI and the ability to go beyond what I term as a syllogism, which is essentially what most large language models are, completing sentences for other people. I don't think I think thinking of large language models by themselves, holistically solving problems or being used as the fulcrum for agents is you're just not going to solve the problem. So I think it's more a question of the ability to marry up Gen AI along with context, which context is always king in this case, and then bringing in large quantitative models from a stochastic and deterministic, and then deciding is it RPA, and are you going to give a fixed set of steps, or are you going to do multi-level orchestration? But the human in the loop is important, because if you're not testing the outputs of your models and not honing them, you're destined to failure in the long term, right? I could run the same experiment a million times, and the millionth and one time, it's probably going to give me a different answer. And that's the beauty of what we do, but that's also the challenge we face, right? So from that perspective, I mean, I think it's important to clearly define what your output's going to be, what your metrics are, what you're hoping to really achieve. And but in terms of context, you got to have a flywheel where you both have domain expertise, as well as you've got the tools you're going to interact with. But if you're going to use MCP, then what systems you're going to call, et cetera, right? So, but I think expecting Gen AI to suddenly be this white knight, I mean, it's not going to be that, right? So, I mean, it's a syllogism. So, right? So.
I want to give another point of view, and of course I agree to what Trevor said, but helps me and help the people I speak about decide when you feel comfortable to actually put AI in front, and where you actually have to have the human there. And the best example I'll give how many times you needed to buy a product, and eventually you ended up speaking with an SDR. Now, I love SDRs, but in reality, you probably know about their solution and your problem more than they do. You live that world, right? I sold to head of customer success previously into Tango, and initially they knew more than I did. So I feel more comfortable putting an AI that will replace that function. AI will do a better job than a junior salesperson that. Where I'm not going to put AI, for example, is representing me. I have AIs that are actually, flooding leads to me, people linking, things like that. I would never have the AI respond with my name because I have my reputation. I need to take a very careful look at that. And I think we're years away from that, by the way, Trevor, and exactly what you said about all those kinds of things. So for me, I'm always looking about, okay, what does it replace? If it replaces a function that is not very educated about what we do, yes, I feel very comfortable in that. If it's supposed to replace something very, very complicated, then no. Then AI could actually save me time, but not replace it. Usually that's the framework I'm looking at. And I think Sandy mentioned it, whether it's Copilot or agent, that's exactly those kinds of things. I would do an agent all the way when it replaces, I would say, a low function, and a Copilot when it replaces a very complex function.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you just look at enterprise software, right? The one thing, and Randy's probably got a good experience with this, is as well as Mike, say hi to Ed, Mike. He was with me at NYSE a couple of weeks back. But with enterprise software, you're limited to seats. But I think what most people miss is that with Gen AI and with agents, what you're really going after is those tasks that most companies probably wouldn't want to hire a human being for, right? Like looking at a bunch of contracts or writing a couple of lines of code, or basically, the road tasks like qualifying leads, as you alluded, Omar, right? And if you look at just the US, we're talking about anywhere, depending on what data source you look at, you're looking about $5 trillion in FTE spend, right? Or salaries, whatever you want to call it. If people believe, if organizations believe that you can give them just 5%, that Gen AI is worth 5% in terms of what they're willing to pay, you're looking at anywhere from 200 million to about 400 billion. So 200 billion to 400 billion dollars in TAM or market cap. And that's what's there. So, you ignore AI and the ability to use AI, at least in enterprise software at your own peril, is where I'm going. Because at 400 billion, I mean, you're like 4 times the existing market cap, the existing TAM that most enterprise software companies are, right? Because you're not limited anymore by people and by headcount. It's more about, atomic units that you're buying. And if demand is elastic, then supply is elastic, right? So not to get too esoteric over there.
Yeah, so Trevor, I think you've got the best stats, man. I got to track you down and follow. You got these great points. So I've been in horizontal workflow automation for 20 something years, right? And one of the things about designing software in that construct is I think about you try to operate, define a process, you try to automate it, and then ultimately you try to eliminate it. And what I've been thinking about with agentic AI is there's this other category beyond that, and I'm calling it elevate. Like there's this whole new world in terms of how to think about a specific process. So I think your point, Trevor, and yours, Omar, is if you're just at the level of trying to automate task workflows and the human is in the loop, like you're behind the curve. You can already have agents do that for you. I think the move is it's up the level of abstraction, Omar, that you're pointing to. It's like when you need human judgment. So the reason you don't want someone to replace you, Omar, is because you've had all of this experience that informs your judgment and how do you reply, and it's hard to train the 4-year-old using your data, Trevor, right? Like when they get more sophisticated and they're 18, now maybe you do trust them because they have judgment in a way that's different. So I think of the human in this condition. And what I'm so interested and excited about is I think workflow automation tools are absolutely obsolete, and the humans now become orchestrators. They become orchestrators like on top of the loop. They're not in the loop. They're over the loop, and they're thinking about things. They're watching. They're tuning. They're escalating. So for you get that 1 out of 1,000 models that comes out wrong, you've got some sort of dashboard, but someone with judgment who's able to assess the output and understand if it's an aberration or is it an improvement based on what happened. My big fear is Omar, you and I look like we're kind of on the other side in terms of we've been around for a while. Is how do you take someone out of college and teach them judgment to be an orchestrator of agents? Like what we've used workflow automation for in the past is a breeding ground. You take that support agent, you have them do a couple of calls, you give them training, and then over 10 or 15 years, they become a sophisticated customer support director. Now you're going to miss this whole middle like mentorship of where people are developing judgment in whatever activity or function they're executing. Sales leader, success leader, marketing leader. If we're reliant on a generation of agents that are doing that for us. So the thing I'm sort of struggling with more broadly, and I'm glad I'm at the end of my career, is kind of like, what's my son going to do coming out of college in a world where you don't have the opportunity to be mentored and learn?
Your son's going to join Honeywell, or your son's going to join Lenovo, or your son's going to join Cisco, or your son's going to go to HP, or your son's going to go to Intel. And what he's going to end up doing is getting a digital twin. And that digital twin is going to be someone who represents the best of the IP that they have. Remember what I said, context is king, right? But domain expertise is king, right? And you alluded to it earlier, about vertical knowledge, right? But the problem, if you talk to Vimal Kapoor at Honeywell, or you talk to even Jensen Wang at NVIDIA, or you talk to Intel or any of the guys, right? But the problem is they don't have that IP readily available in terms of skill sets. So what they really want is to capture all that IP that they've had for the last 15, 20, 30 years, and then share that information in the form of digital twins. So when your son joins them, he gets the expertise and the ability to ask questions out of the gate on what would Randy do in this scenario, what would Omar do in this scenario, or what would Julia do in this scenario, and he gets the benefit of all the years of experience. The thing is, as long as you're focusing on text, you're fine. When you bring in video and you start talking about predicting where the pixels are going to land, like I have a pencil and I say, is it going to drop here or here? That's where we're nowhere over there. But replicating people using, going and looking at all their videos, their text, and getting opinions. I mean, for example, a year ago, I always tell people I'm jealous of Alexander the Great because he had Aristotle teaching him for 14 years. And unfortunately, I'm a tad young, right? But I'm a huge fan of Aristotle and I've read it in Greek, right? But what we did, the first thing we did was, and partly because of me, was we created a digital twin of Aristotle on rhetoric, because I think rhetoric's been lost, right, in our education, right? So it's not that difficult as long as it's around text and finding the next best sentence, because language is pretty predictable, noun, noun, verb, noun, noun, adverb, right? The problem comes in when you look at large quantitative models. You're talking about stochastic versus deterministic, and you're trying to predict what the probability is of a certain event happening, which you were alluding to earlier, Randy. That's where Gen AI is a nice way to synthesize data and talk to your data, but it's not going to do that for you, right? At least I haven't figured it out yet. So maybe you guys have.
Yeah, Randy, I also wanted to double down on your point there. I really liked your heuristic of, whether or not we're applying human judgment to, kind of going back to the question here, where do we determine how to use humans versus agents? I also wanted to share a framework that I personally use when I'm working with B2B companies to determine this question, both for my own work, as well as the work that I'm advising the teams on. And it's, kind of at a high level, simply speaking, we use agents. I use agents for work that requires low creative complexity, and we generally lean on humans for work that requires high creative complexity. Just to kind of give an example here, if a task is repetitive, as Omar and Randy and many of you have pointed to, and it follows a clear pattern, and it doesn't necessarily require novel thinking, generally speaking, it's kind of a good candidate for us to consider whether or not it's a good fit for agents to run it. And here are some of those use cases or tasks include things like pulling reports, summarizing support tickets, enriching leads, so on and so forth. But if the task does have high creative complexity, or it requires some level of emotional intelligence or original creativity, a lot of the work that I do, for example, includes things like crafting a go-to-market narrative, or spinning up a new set of creatives that reflects new brand positioning, or handling perhaps a tricky client escalation, or even setting strategy for the next half of the year. That's where I really find that human plus augmented by AI is going to be a lot more powerful. So in that situation, myself or the team would end up using an AI tool or a copilot that's primarily orchestrated and or operated by the human, that just gives us more control on that creative output, because we know that the outcome or the quality has so much more variance between what is good and what is bad. And, I do think one of the ways to overcome this overall agent adoption barrier that we've been talking about here is to really try to figure out how we can apply this framework and figure out which parts of the tasks that we need to complete have that low versus high creative complexity. I'll give one use case that I recently, utilized AI agents for actually hiring, right? Like hiring actually overall seems like something with really high creative complexity. However, when you actually break down the different components of it, there are parts of that workflow that can actually be very useful to apply AI agents to. For example, screening resumes, right? Use a combination of AI prompts as well as tools to help identify and pinpoint who we should be moving forward in the screening process. And then in that process, recently when I made a hire, I also used an AI voice interview agent called Mirrorwork to auto-complete the screenings and summarize the results for me, so that basically in my inbox, I see exactly who I should have a human connection with and complete final round interviews for. Because during that process, as Omar was pointing out too, it's kind of representing me, it's representing, my brand, it's representing kind of that sales conversation too, of like, you want to work with me, not just, the AI screener here. So, completed the final round interviews, hired someone within less than a week. And like, that's something that I never imagined would have been able to happen without those agentic powers. So, one of the frameworks that I use, very simply, perhaps oversimplified, but really thinking about, what is the level of creative complexity involved in the type of work, and how can agents and or a combination of human plus, co-pilots and or AI augmented tools help me complete this task.
Sandy, let me push the envelope a bit on this specific use case because I love it. And that's example of a business processes that AI can enhance and augment and help. And you spoke about one part, but I'm going to ask you two questions. I don't know what the answer is, but one, do you think that the way you're actually interviewing people, is it good enough? And two, are your decisions of hiring the right people, are they good enough? And what I'm saying is, if we apply AI to this, AI could actually find patterns. It could tell you, you know what, your interview was amazing, but you probably should have asked those kinds of questions. Now, is that going to be right or wrong? I don't know, but that's a good brainstorming, I would say, colleague to actually see if you can improve the way you interview. The same way, you could tell AI, I've interviewed those 5 people. These are our interviews, and I've decided to pick this one. And these are the reasons. AI could actually reflect and say, you know what? This is what I think about it. Again, it could be completely wrong, but in my experience, it will help you gain more insights and thus improve the process as well. So it's not just automating, it's also about really, I would say, a brainstorming pal for me. And I'm trying to combine it in as many aspects as we can. Sometimes the results are ridiculous, but we're experienced enough to say that's fine, that's not relevant. But sometimes, oh, I didn't think about those things. And that's what really amazes me. And I think it will improve and improve.
I love it. In fact, I think you're spot on. In fact, I haven't applied the AI to my portion of the interview, right? And so I think one of the things that's missing there is I actually firmly believe that the screener, the AI, interview agent, does a better job than me in identifying the signals that a candidate is going to need to qualify for the round. For example, I put in about 8 criteria, different skills like communication, collaboration, et cetera, and I believe that in my conversations, I'm actively looking for all 8 of those signals, but I think the reality is that my mind share, what I'm actually processing, is probably a maximum of 1 at a time. And realistically, in a 45-minute, even 1-hour interview conversation, I'm probably not getting as much clarity on the signals as possible. So I think that, and then also making sure that the way that I run those interviews, I'm actually looking for the exact same signals I think that I was originally screening for. I don't have a feedback loop there. And that's a great example of how, I can further use, agentic powers to, provide feedback to the interviewer as well, to say, did the interviewer actually hold up their part in completing this process? So I love that push.
Yeah, one of the companies that we are working with that they actually started to use their agents to do the interview, to at least do the first round of interviews. But one of the things that because we also review all the recordings and the different to review all the transcript as well. And the one scenario we actually observed that one of the candidates is also using AI agent. So we are in the situation that we have an AI agent candidates that's actually talking to an AI interviewer candidate, which is a very interesting scenario. So I'm really curious to see how this goes.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go into their own language if one AI agent was talking to the other, but we've seen that happen. So
Yeah, are you talking in 0 and 1s?
yeah.